We're back. We're back on with our daily show with our special guest for a second time, who's also back. I told him before we started recording that he's probably got to change his screening process because he's ending up on the show far too often. Last time you were on the show, let me talk about why. Not that I wouldn't gladly have you back on whenever you wanted to come on, but
I appreciate that.
Or against your will, even. And probably
is this really a daily show?
Yes, Monday through Friday. It was like 6:30, and then Ryan was on Ryan time. Fun fact about Ryan: he kind of goes on his own clock.
Yep. All right. So if you're saying I can be on here whenever I want, I could be on here every day.
You could be on here every day. I don't know if you would want to do that, but
well, you said it's all a matter of screening. If I screened out every other show I do, yours by comparison would be the best. And then I could be on every day and think I'm crushing it, and maybe I would be.
I kind of agree with this logic. I think we could set this up.
He's trying to replace me in real time, people. See? He's swapping me out for a doctor. The only competition I have, David, is a doctor. You got to steal me with a presidential doctor. All right. I see.
I'll have my people, which is me, get with your people.
No, hi, I'm the people.
Oh, she's a producer. She just doesn't touch any of the electronics or do any of the stuff, but she does sit here and listen. We're derailed. Obviously, the reason.
Am I back? Did I get screened out already?
No, you're good.
That was bad.
It's a long-running joke Dave and I have that he's trying to replace me in real time, and because he doesn't pay me, of course, and Dave's getting trillions off this podcast because the information is next level, and Dave knows it, and it's just running.
Two of us, only one of him. Maybe we vote him off the island.
I like this. Everything's still linked to my bank account, so if you guys crush it, I'm all for it.
Just Veep, guys. To
be fair, I would pay Ryan, but he doesn't have Venmo, so I guess you're just out of luck.
I told him cash. I don't want traceable. I'm fighting the government, but you're going to pay me with taxes, David? I don't understand.
I've got this handy dandy. This is a remote control.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
It works for several thousand kilometers, I understand. So let me see if I can control your studio from here. Hold on. Put the infrared up there by my...
Yeah, I don't... We could try... Listen, I wouldn't be surprised by anything. Ryan and myself, we covered a news article that... an 800 watt, which is like equivalent to a small microwave, laser beam zapped a piece of popcorn from 5.5 miles away.
Zapped a corn kernel and turned it into
We annihilated a piece of popcorn with a laser beam.
What was it, Dave? The beam was like a meter long or something,
it was
a foot long. They shot a foot-long beam out of like an 800-watt equivalent. Yeah. And it hit something 5 miles away the size of a piece of popcorn.
That's really extraordinary. See, so what this really comes down to is we're not really sure this whole thing that happened yesterday wasn't just Pete Hegseth with a microwave on top of the Pentagon.
It's very possible. He does strike me as a microwave guy.
Yeah, it's probably 2 microwaves, really, at least. It's at least a 3 microwave atomic bomb.
The reason we talk about this is because we've been talking about the Jewish space lasers forever. And of course, that's a conspiracy theory. But then you get these like little...
Spike says that he controls that.
Spike Cohen? Is that what he said?
Okay, I could see that.
About it, so it must be true.
I could see that. Yeah, that would make sense.
Now, I want to point out, before we get too far into this show, a couple of things. The Iranians have vowed to use the same firepower that we did, at least numerically. So they must have 12 microwaves also. And I'd like to point out that I personally have a tremendous amount of equipment. I do not have a Jewish space laser, nor do I have a Lutheran space laser, which would be just as cool, maybe. I don't know.
Satanic space laser.
I do have this.
Is it a swing line?
It's a stapler?
It's my swing line. My swing line.
I have a red one at work. For what it's worth.
Now, you need to be very careful of this. Let me explain, because some of your audience may not be familiar with this. Don't ever get your tongue stuck in here, okay? Don't want that to happen. Don't get your tongue stuck in here. If you need to clean it, don't lick it out, okay? Okay.
Are you trying to intimidate Iran right now?
No, don't get your ear stuck in here. Okay. Like, no, don't do that. If you need to wear earrings and they're not pierced, just maybe wear a clip on or something like that. A lot of people are not familiar with the operation of this piece of equipment.
Well, that's actually why I brought you on today. I wanted to talk about staplers.
I think
I
that's
stick with the
a
Iranians.
good idea.
Okay, so this leads me to why I actually brought you on, in all seriousness.
Okay.
When we had you on the first time, you were a vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. Okay.
That's probably true. Yes, probably.
Yeah, see, I see.
When we did this.
Yes, on paper that was the case.
Yep.
It was a little over a year ago, actually. With that said, I got news. It came through me to my email, so somehow somebody signed me up to your newsletter, and I don't know if it was me or maybe it was the Jews.
Data collection Jews, David.
But it said that you have switched to the Liberty Caucus of the Republican Party.
Yes, called the Republican Liberty Caucus.
Oh, perfect. And I wanted to talk about a little bit why, because I've been talking about for a while on this show that I don't know what the best answer is to an alternative. Is it make the Libertarian Party viable, which historically has seemed difficult, or is it reform the Republican Party from the inside? I suspect you may be on that second option at this point.
Well, I'm on the second option at this point, and for those who say both are hard, I would have to agree with that. I think both of them seem hard. I think the Libertarian Party will get back on better footing. In the short run, I think it's going to right its ship. I don't know whether Stephen Nikela is going to hang in there, run for another term. Personally, I'm a bit of a Stephen Nikela fan. I think he's a good guy. I think if he would stand for election, that might help the party. But whoever it is, I think that, and whatever that leadership looks like, almost no matter what the leadership looks like, I do believe that the party is going to get on stronger footing than it has been, learn to recruit more members, raise more money, participate in elections with some more success. Plenty of positive heydays, I think, are in the future for the Libertarian Party. Having said that, I think that the party is destined to continue to replay the cycles of the past. In the short run, it'll get back on its feet, but it's always going to attract a lot of folks who, instead of being just laser focused on running candidates, are going to be focused on other things, including infighting over policy, infighting over control, and internal party politics. That's just the nature of the beast. And it's inherent in a two-party system. If you're the third party in a two-party system, you're quite literally, by definition, outside of the system. And so, again, quite literally, by definition, you're going to attract people who are not interested in the system. You're going to attract a lot of people who are interested in trying to participate in the system, no question about it. But you're also going to attract people who have just given up on the system and are looking for a home that fits with their philosophy, which is fine and wonderful and great, but makes it a little bit different from a political party in the traditional sense. So a lot of folks on our team have lost some faith in the idea that the Libertarian Party is going to be different in the future than it has been in the past. And again, that's not to say that it won't be wonderful. It has been wonderful in the past, 51 years of doing a lot of important things. I would expect the next 51 years to be approximately similar. Different in many ways, but accomplish terrific things in the future. Having said that, that's not enough. It's not enough. The government of the United States at the federal level is presenting at least 3 different existential threats to our society, I believe. We can talk about those, or maybe that's too dark, but
you can't out-dark us, I promise.
You can't out-dark you guys.
No,
we did plastic.
We did a 2-part episode on adrenochrome, so I think we're good.
Yeah, I get where you guys are coming from. I appreciate that. One is a financial collapse. One is a military intervention that we can't get out of, and the third is is a downward spiral of civil unrest. Obviously, there's a great deal to be teased out about each one of those. But because I believe that these are much more likely and much more chronologically proximate coming than before. I'm not sure what I mean by before. Certainly more than a decade ago, right? For these reasons, I believe that we don't have time. We don't have as much time as you would want if you were betting on the Libertarian Party, I think is how I would say that. In other words, it's fire drill time, it's break the glass time, and it's time to think outside the box, maybe outside the party. It's time to do whatever it takes. And that means, doing maybe some crazy stuff, maybe doing some crazy, you probably have a kid show. I'll be careful with my mouth.
Super kid. Yeah. Especially that adrenochrome episode.
Yeah.
Pro kid, definitely pro kid.
What third grader doesn't love a podcast on that, right? So I think we need to be prepared.
Transgenderism was second grade, adrenochrome's third grade. I mean, it just makes sense.
But you guys are advanced. I didn't
on
cover
this show.
Dave,
on this show, we read anti-racist baby. So this is good for children. Anything you can say is good for children.
Well, yeah, and who wouldn't love an anti-racist baby? As a matter of fact, I've got 2 children. They're fully grown. I don't believe that they are racist. As a matter of fact, I know that they're not.
But it's not good enough to be not racist.
A baby from one of them, right? I'm lobbying for grandchildren, and if I get a grandchild anytime soon, I will ask you for recommendations for reading material because I would like anti-racist grandchildren.
Remember, it's not good enough to not be racist. You must be vigorously anti-racist.
I remember that from the Libertarian Party presidential candidate a few hours ago, a few years ago. Yeah.
Reading that book is like Hitler propaganda for kids. All you got to change is racism for like anti-Jew or anti-this. It was just so. But when we cover it, it's beautiful.
You can feel free to completely decline to answer this, but I'm extraordinarily curious.
Yeah, I don't want to answer that.
When we had you on the first time as the vice presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party,
which we all thought was going to be the last time. To be fair, we all thought that was it.
We certainly did. I thought for sure I liked you a lot without ever even meeting the guy. Okay, I want to give him credit.
Well, a lot more than your podcast partner. Yeah, I get that.
I thought I liked you a lot more than the guy who was the presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I understand. And in fairness, I liked him a lot more than you guys too. So. Do you mean
I will drive down to Washington?
You guys do, or more than I liked you guys?
I don't know how much you like us. You like us enough to still come on.
Well, let's put it this way: I talk to you guys once a year. I talk to Chase once a month.
There you go. You guys on good terms? Because you guys seem very different. I'm just being honest. You guys seem like total
different, but we have a lot of the same objectives, right? We're both a couple of crazies that'll do anything for liberty. I think that that's a fair characterization of each of us. We have different backgrounds, different ages. We come at libertarianism from 2 different directions, I suppose, but in the main, we wound up in the same place. This is probably more answer than you want, but we got nothing else to talk about. After the nomination was over, we spent the next day talking about a lot of policies and looking for differences, right? And because, we're about to campaign together, you kind of want to know where you're going to end up being mad at each other or someone's going to try to drive a wedge. Mm-hmm. And we found out that nearly everything we agreed on, we had a little bit different language that we were used to using. And it was a bit of a learning experience, each of us getting used to the other one's language. But in terms of policy, we were completely simpatico. And I think that was a bit of a revelation for each of, to be fair, because I think that we thought we were more different than we were too. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so our styles probably remain different, and where we came from and our backgrounds and, all that. What you can't change 40 years of history, right? But in terms of the policies that we believed in and what it was that we were trying to get done, we couldn't find but a tiny difference. And how we go about things may be different. Chase doesn't want any part of the Republican Party. I get that. Was our last conversation, as you might imagine. I had to call him and say, this is what we're going to do. And I would be lying if I told you he was all excited and thought that was a brilliant idea. And, but he was totally supportive. I mean, look, he said, I hope it works. I think he's skeptical. But
Well, and
what intelligent person wouldn't be skeptical about changing American politics?
Well, I was just going to say, and to be fair, I mean, why wouldn't you be skeptical given what we just went through? We had Trump who, while running, got, I wouldn't say support from the Libertarian Party. I would say from some of the base of the Libertarian Party for sure. I wouldn't say the party necessarily supported Trump, but what the party did do was give him kind of a chance to be seen by the party in certain ways. And, given all of that, and to have Trump campaign as the pro-peace president, right? And then to flash ahead to now, which, by the way, when we invited you on the show, I think it was still pre-Israel strike on Iran. So a lot has happened since. And
pre-October, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right. I don't remember exactly, but I think that's right.
So, and here we are now with the United States, who have just successfully bombed Iran, if you want to use the term successfully. I guess the bombs did hit.
So the jury is out on that. We don't know, because I think there were some specific things that the administration was trying to accomplish with that, and we don't know whether they have accomplished it. On the other hand, we're going to bend over backward to be fair to the administration here, because I've already come out and said, I don't like it. So that's sort of the foundation we're standing on, is none of the three of us like the fact that the bombing took place. But having said that, let's see if we can be nice about it.
That's not really our shtick, but I'm for it.
Yeah. I get it. Well, let's try something new, right? The Iranians are responding with something that is measured and limited, and signaling so. And by signaling in advance, they appear to be trying to limit American casualties with the attack on the airbase in Qatar. If things go as we believe that they will, then it may well be that we find ourselves back at the negotiating table. Now, this isn't how I would have suggested going about it, but it is possible that this doesn't go badly, right? I still think there's 25 different risks out there. This could go south on us. But it is completely possible that, notwithstanding the fact that I don't think this is very constitutional, I don't think it was well advised, I think it was risky relative to what we were trying to accomplish. And perhaps the most important thing we rarely talk about, it sort of continues the American expectation that the president gets to do whatever he wants. In other words, there would have been...
I want to touch...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on the constitutionality of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
What can a president unilaterally do? Because it's my understanding generally now for a legit, and I'm not saying I agree with whatever, but for a legitimate act of, or a legitimate declaration of war, right? That goes through Congress. My understanding is he's still the commander in chief of the military. He can still execute strikes without Congress. Is that right or not right?
Only in, what you might call an emergency. That's not the legal
Well, and
term.
that's what that's unfortunately why we talk. Ryan has brought this up many times, but why he's not a fan of state of emergency, because you can use it to just unilaterally wipe people's rights out.
That's exactly right.
I mean, that's why it's a state of emergency, right? It's like the emergency is that like there's no civilian government compromise. It's that you just you're under tyranny. And we have them up where I live a lot for snowstorms. They call state of emergencies and say you can't drive and stuff, but it's like everybody still drives because they're like, fuck you, dude. I need milk. Like I don't care that the snow's out there. This is where we live. And you always hear the old timers like, back in my day, we walked up the hill to school in this, and you kids are soft. And
you're mocking me because that is what I say. And I try to use that voice, but it's hard.
Yeah, I got the pitch because of youth's on my side. It will leave. You'll be here for episode 2099 when you're finally the cyborg president of the future and all your hopes are finally recognized.
I'll be in a computer.
I will be the computer. Look at me now.
I'll be inside of it. Right?
Dr. Mike, what do we do?
I won't have to worry about pressing a shirt for you guys. I'll just be inside of a computer.
Hey, press your shirt for me. What a guy. What a guy.
Oh, absolutely. I put on pants.
Wow.
This is a high event.
I would hit on you, but that would put me on a list somewhere that I'm not on yet. So
I think that's true. Yeah, that's probably
if I were to guess, you got a better shot with Chase.
Constitutionality suggests that this is really problematic. To get back on track, I think it's very problematic because Congress is the only part of the government that can declare war. The president can defend us under exigent circumstances, and I think it would be pretty difficult to characterize this as an emergency. I understand that that's in effect the case that's being made, right?
Well, and for good reason, because Iran has been 5 years away from a nuke for 30 years. So they're getting close.
Well, and now they're going to be 30 years away for 5 years.
They're on Ryan time for sure.
Because
they're definitely on Ryan time.
Now the administration is going to be able to claim that they set them very far back, even though we have no assessment on the effect of the bombing yet. But the administration is going to claim, possibly correctly, that they have significantly delayed the capability of the Iranians to develop a nuclear weapon. But unless the Iranians are really on the edge and you know it, you don't really have an emergency, especially when we know that we could have launched this attack with a week's notice, right? And probably a lot less than that.
Do you think Trump's operating then? Do you think it could be possible that because I kind of thought while you were talking about, they plan to use the same level of retaliation. And obviously, there's a lot of theologies to war and everything, and they operate on a different legal system and theology of their war. But we always heard years and years that our southern borders open and expect like Al-Qaeda terrorist groups. And we always heard some political stuff, some real stuff, MS-13, the drugs, etc. So I almost wonder if some of these ICE raids that we kind of seen is like the greasing of the skids of the government to get that gear of the government real honed in case we do have enemies, here from abroad,
I'm not suggesting that is, an idea without some merit. I just don't think that there's that much forethought going on. I think the president said,
I definitely,
we need to deport a lot of people, a lot of people, and I want it done fast. And then he gets really, really bad staff work with people who do whatever it takes to do it expeditiously and then disregard due process and claim that the reason they can disregard due process is because they had a lot of votes in November and this needs to be done because it's really, really important. The Constitution does not have a really, really important loophole when it comes to due process. And I think one of the things that we need to remind each other and remind Democrats and remind Republicans and from time to time remind libertarians and members of the Libertarian Party, we need to remind everybody that the government only exists because of the Constitution. The Constitution is what gives the government any legitimacy and any power at all. Were it not for the Constitution, the government would just be a whole bunch of people with thumbs up their butt. They would have nothing to do.
Private rape islands.
So it isn't possible logically, ethically. It is not possible in a fashion that's consistent with traditional American cultural views on our government. It is not possible to say, well, we're going to assume some power because it's important, and we're going to have to compromise with the Constitution. It's not a thing, because the Constitution is to the government existential. In other words, if you're trying to figure out a way to do something and there's no constitutional way to do it, you can't do it, right? You just don't have any. You don't have any power. There is no wherewithal. You in that space, you really don't exist, because the Constitution is that existential, creative document that allows the government to exist, much less function. And the government is defined by its functionality, and its functions are granted by the Constitution. The government is not limited by the Constitution. Everything the Constitution doesn't say the government can do, the government cannot do. So the Constitution isn't limiting the government. The Constitution is giving the government power. And to the extent to which it falls short of the power that you wish you had, you just don't have it. And there are a lot of folks in the American government today who don't want all that to be true. When the vice president tweets, paraphrasing, I won't remember exactly what he said, but the vice president tweeted, if those of you out there, if you're one of these people, if you're demanding due process that precludes us from getting all these deportations done, that means basically saying that's a tell, right? You have revealed yourself to want all these people to remain in the United States. That is such incorrect thinking that it should cause the hair to stand up on the back of your neck. The fact that it came out of the mouth, rhetorically speaking, came off the fingers of the Vice President of the United States of America should be chilling. Because what he's saying is, we need to deport these people, go figure it out, as opposed to recognizing the Constitution gives us an ability to do certain things. And if we can't get done what we want, then that just is too bad, because that's the reality.
I'm curious a little bit on the nitty-gritty of the mass deports, if I'm honest, because there's a couple of things at play. One is, what level of due process is due, which is that a trial? And it's certainly not a. Is it a civil offense? Is it a what is due? And
well, that's an interesting point, because it seems to me that the administration is looking at this sideways. You don't really need much due process in most cases. And let's start in the order of priority that the administration promised us they would conduct these deportations, right? You start with someone who's an adjudicated criminal. You've already been convicted of a crime. Mm-hmm. You've already had your due process. You don't need any more due process. I mean, you got to prove that is the guy you think it is. I mean, due process ought to include making sure that's the right person.
For sure.
I get that. But beyond that, you don't need a hearing. If someone has been adjudicated a criminal, I think that should be enough for us. Now, if you have not been adjudicated a criminal, you're going to have to give someone the right to say, I have a right to be in the United States. And in some cases, I think that doesn't require more than a 10-minute hearing. If we know that you're here illegally, you have crossed the border. If you cross the border illegally, that's actually a crime. If you overstay a visa, I think that's just a civil matter. But let's say you cross the border illegally. Mm-hmm. Due process really only needs to demonstrate that you're that person. and that you came across illegally. You got to, in my view, someone could argue, but in my view, you ought to give someone a chance to say, actually, that's not me, right? My name is actually Phil, or I am here legally. And that could be any number of reasons. I have a visa that you don't know about. You think my visa expired, but it didn't. A court stayed my deportation order because of something. This was the case with the fellow that was sent to the El Salvadoran prison.
The Maryland man, as he was described by the media.
The Maryland father, right.
Yes.
And he's such a wonderful guy. Frankly, I have no idea whether he is or not. I have my suspicions that he's not Mr. Wonderful, but that's irrelevant, right? That it doesn't matter. As a matter of fact, for purposes of this, I kind of hope that he's a horrible person, because that would better make the point that you need to give due process even to the worst of the worst.
100%.
And the fact that he was not given due process is inextricably linked to the fact that there was a mistake. The mistake probably would have been caught if there was a 5-minute hearing, so that he could have said, or his attorney, someone could have said, you're right, I was ordered deported, but that deportation was stayed because X, Y, and Z. In this case, because it was deemed unsafe for me to go back to El Salvador.
It's kind of funny that written in due process is also like the framework, kind of what you said about the existentialism that resides in the Constitution, that within due process, it also promotes better governance, which also makes it less clunkier. You don't make mistakes. You're not making political like all of this would have literally been avoided if you just listen to the dang document, man. Like, it's right there. Like, just do what you were supposed, what you vowed to do.
That is an interesting point. The other point I think that you're about to make is that the more we compromise, or the more power that we glom onto in the executive, the more likely it is that we're going to resent that when someone from a different party is elected and is doing things that you don't like, right? It's just, this started 100 years ago, but
with the Civil War, you mean, or World Wars, or?
No, I mean, I think the executive has been glomming power for a long, long time. I didn't mean literally only 100 years. One could argue that it started with Thomas Jefferson, but I think a lot of people have been powering up the executive. And I think you'd have to say that it accelerated under the 2012 second Obama administration. I think you'd have to argue that the Biden administration didn't have a tremendous amount of respect for the Constitution. So it's just one thing leading to another. And Republicans who would like for the executive to be extremely powerful might be disappointed when someday a Democrat gets elected. I recognize the Democratic Party is doing everything it can to make sure that never happens. But on the off chance that they actually elect someone again, that's going to be a very, very powerful Democrat who is lowercase d democratically elected and has all kinds of power.
Yeah, it's like they're I've always said on the program, is something that I've heard in the space before, but it's almost they give us they take our real rights, give us corporate rights, right, through like Facebook or social media and all these things, and then at the tippy top, they're basically just corporatized to just have all the power.
Well, I think you're right, but there's an awful lot of populist crap that goes on too. The Biden administration saying you don't have to pay back your student loans for a while. That was not constitutional. Courts pointed that out. But it would be hard to argue that the Biden administration was making policy with a budget in one hand and the Constitution in the other. That was a populist administration. It just wasn't as good at it as the Trump administration.
I have one other question too about the mass deportations. Also on the constitutional level, what amount of rights are due to non-citizens? Is it equal across the board? Everybody in the let me say it this way: do the rights go to the interior of the borders of this country, or do the rights go to the people of this country?
The rights go to humans by virtue of being human, and the power of the government is defined by the Constitution. So, if the government decides it wants to treat one person one way, another person either the same way or a different way, it has to be empowered to do so by the Constitution. And there's nothing in the Constitution that says how to treat one person differently than another. But it does say that everyone has to get due process. The Constitution is not giving you your due process rights.
Sure, they recognize
You already
rights
have
that are
You
delivered
already have them. The
from your
Constitution
creator.
is
Sure.
allowing the government to do certain things if and only if it follows due process. Due process is flexible in the sense that different situations, right? So I would suggest, and I think that the courts would historically back me up on this, it's really a matter of the situation the human being finds himself in more than whether or not he's a citizen. So, for example, we just came up with a couple examples a few minutes ago. Here's another one. Sending someone to a prison in El Salvador. That's imprisonment pursuant to a federal contract with the either El Salvadoran government or an entity in El Salvador that's closely controlled by the government. Imprisoning someone should require more due process than deporting someone. I'm just going to assert that, okay? I'm willing to argue that point, and I think courts would back me up. It's less important whether someone is a citizen or not. For purposes of deportation, whether you're a citizen or not is everything. But as far as imprisonment goes, that's another matter. Then all of a sudden what's really critical is not whether you're a citizen, but whether what you have done can be proven and rises to the level of warranting imprisonment as a punishment. In other words, if you showed up in court because you were arrested for doing something naughty, right? You punched some guy in the face and you showed up in court, you get adjudicated. Did you do it? Did you not do it? Maybe you get proven guilty and the judge sentences you. All that takes place in the same fashion, whether you're a citizen or not. So, is this a deportation or is it an imprisonment? Well, in the case of these people being sent to the El Salvador prison, it's both, right?
Well, do you think they did that specifically almost as a loophole? Or
Absolutely.
Basically, like,
absolutely.
I'm the U.S. government, right? I'm not putting him in prison. I'm not violating his due process here, in theory, right? I think this is what they're going with. I sent him to El Salvador, and then they took care of it.
Right.
What else? If El Salvador puts him in prison, what do you want me to do? I'm not El Salvador, right? Almost like I didn't do it.
That's right, but there is no loophole there. It's as though there were a loophole, but there isn't one.
Because there's supposed to be due process to him regardless, which would remove all the muddy in the water, and this guy would just go back to his country if he had to, or he would stay here if he was deemed eligible to stay here.
Yeah, I think that's
it's so
right.
crazy. It's like the government self-sabotages itself, and then we deal with the politic blowback.
Of course. Of course. That's actually well said, I think. So my point is that the amount of due process required needs to match what it is you're doing to someone, as opposed to whether or not they're a citizen. If you're going to imprison someone, you need to prove that they have committed a crime.
So you're arguing it's not only a violation of due process, but it's also cruel and unusual punishment.
A double whammy, David. A double whammy.
I don't know. What if the prison were lovely?
I've heard nice things about El Salvador. 4.5
Yeah,
stars on Yelp.
I hear it's
Oh, they Yelp in
nice
El
vacation
Salvador.
spot.
Yeah, El
But
Salvadorian Yelp.
if it
Yelp.
were the kind of place that our country sends white collar, wealthy prisoners who are not violent and don't pose
Berkeley?
risk to each other, I don't think that would change anything. So, if it were not cruel and not all that unusual to do it inside the United States, it just happens to be outside the United States, I don't really think that changes much. But to imprison someone, I think due process has to include a criminal trial.
So it's a human right violation, bare minimum. It's like truly, which not bare minimum. It's like a big deal.
Bare
Yes,
maximum.
I would agree with that. Now, if you really are not imprisoning them, if you really are just dumping them at the airport,
Mm-hmm.
and the El Salvadoran government is picking them up, then, okay. But that's not what's happening. You're going from custody to custody pursuant to a contract with the El Salvadoran government. Don't try,
This is military-industrial complex kind of shit. Then, like the
a
police
little bit. The whole idea that we're not imprisoning them is gaslighting.
Political gaslighting, Dave. Political Stockholm syndrome, some would call it, David.
Now, the majority of people are not in that situation. The majority of the deportations really are deportations. We're dumping them out. And that can be pretty rough.
This just highlights the purpose of due process, man. Your whole thing just about like, dude, if we took 5 minutes, this wouldn't have been an issue. It's like, dude, I thought constitutional amendments were just for me, dude. No, like, that's actually really kind of smart. Way to go, founding fathers. You guys like built in pretty much making this dummy proof. Like, hey, man, you don't even need to, you just got to read. Like, you just literally have to.
You may be a little optimistic, but I see where you're going. And,
yeah,
I agree that if you took it seriously, you could avoid a lot of silliness. There are, the vast majority of deportations are, of course, legal. Whether they're getting enough due process or not remains to be, I think, evaluated in the great span of history. But if someone is here illegally, the fact that they're a nanny doesn't really impress me. The fact that they have a job doesn't really impress me as a legal matter. Now, as a cultural matter and good policy, if the administration decided, for a certain proportion of these people, we're going to reverse course and develop a pathway to legal status, I think a lot of Americans would be fine with that. I think I personally would be fine with that, depending on what the steps are. And for the following reason. Well, first of all, as a practical matter, you're just not going to be able to deport everybody. So a lot of people are going to be here one way or another. So legalizing them may be expeditious. But the other is, to be honest, let's get down to brass tacks. The Biden administration and previous administrations allowed these folks to come in. Allowing someone to come into the United States is pretty close to an invitation. This is the best place to live in the world. Hands down. This is the best place to live in the world.
Well, they're not breaking down the walls of El Salvador, I can tell you that.
They're not, or anywhere else.
Not going to London.
So,
well, some of the Muslims are.
If you have the best place in the world to live and you're not watching your border, I think what's going to happen, I think that's fairly predictable. You don't get to pretend like, oh, I didn't think that was going to happen. They're taking advantage of us in a way that, now I'm mad. No, you should have been mad in the beginning because you knew darn well what was going to happen. Don't talk to me about that. And
to be fair to Trump, though, he was mad in the beginning.
Yes. Oh, right. So we get that, and we can all weigh in on whether he was mad for the right reasons or for wrong reasons or for smart reasons or dumb reasons. But you're right. And that's fine. And let's also be honest, the three of us, as dumb as we may be, are smart enough to have run that border. If you were
Yeah.
in Mexico, if you were in Central America, if you were in South America, and that border is open, and you're living under one of these regimes in Central America where it's hard to make ends meet, it's not safe, it's not a good place to raise a family, you're running that border. Don't tell me you're not. As a matter of fact, I'm knocking on your door on my way because, like, are you guys coming or not? Because staying here is not a good idea. We're boosting each other up over that wall, whether we're cutting links or blasting a hole between the pylons. We're getting through that wall one way or another. And most of the border is open. There are ways to get through. If you get caught the first time and put back, try again. That's what we're going to do. And if you're not, I got to ask why, right? If you're not running that border and you're trying to raise a family in El Salvador, I've got to ask, do you not get it, right? Do you not have
Or they're in the gang. Yeah, or they're in the gang or something and invested in that whole culture.
Good point. So
they're the coyotes.
Are here because they made the same decision that I would have made. They're here illegally. You assume a risk, and that risk is that the government's going to find you. You're going to get deported. So if you start raising a family here, your family could be ripped apart, or the entire family goes back, and that depends on that government taking your family. The kids are going to be American citizens, so any other government is not under any obligation to take them. It gets complicated, it gets messy, and that's on you. I understand that. But I think most Americans would be okay with developing a path to some sort of legal status for people who, haven't committed a crime. They did what any of us would have done. They didn't commit any crime other than running the border illegally, which is a crime. But they haven't committed any crime after they've been here, as a practical matter and as a cultural matter.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly an argument to be made there. To your point, if you're non-violently breaking the law to get here, if your only crime is coming across the border illegally, I have caveats to all of this. I agree with the premise for sure, but here at the end of the day, here's what I need bare minimum. I need assimilation, and I do take issue with people who come here illegally and don't put their roots down. Like, let's say this. Your argument was somebody came here illegally, they established a family. Wait, stop. We got to figure something out before you start establishing families, because now we're getting into the very messy territory that you're talking about. I'm all for people, and if anything else, I think the answer and the onus could be on us to make the process easier to get here in the first place. I think that's a better solution.
Legally.
Correct.
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely the solution to all of this. I would caution us against mixing up public policy with how you feel about various cultures.
Sure.
I love tacos, so bring on the Mexicans, man.
Okay, me too. And I think we need to be careful about saying people need to assimilate. Really, do they need to? Says who? Says what? That's not a public policy discussion.
Well, to become a part, to become a,
is a good idea.
I think on a moral standpoint, in my opinion, I think if you're going to come to our country because our country's better, I agree with you 100%. So be a part of our country.
Right, but that's not a public policy matter. That's just your advice.
I'm not saying on policy. I'm just saying in general. I don't think you can legally make them speak English,
right?
For example, but you're coming to my country.
Probably learning.
I'm sorry. You're coming to our country because our country is superior. You're acknowledging our country is superior. I agree. Let's be part of the country together. I don't need your country, to be perfectly honest. And immigration is a little bit public policy wise. It could be a little. We should be able to be picky and choosy, if I'm being completely honest.
I'm not sure of that. I'm not sure of that. And let me point out why I'm not sure of that.
From a pragmatic standpoint, I'm saying, like, if
No,
I'm
no. I hear
sure.
you. I hear you. I'm unconvinced. And the reason I'm unconvinced is because the reason the United States is the best place to live,
Mhm.
the reason is because we have historically had the lightest touch in terms of a government.
But agreed. Yeah, 100%.
Okay. The moment you start having the conversation about what you think people should do,
Me personally is what I'm saying. I'm not saying from a public.
I
Again, I don't
understand.
think we legally make people speak English or
I
legally.
understand. But as soon as you have that conversation, you're undermining what it is that makes this a great place to live.
Uh, I'd say go a little further on that.
What makes America a great place is that you can do whatever the hell you want to do, and I shut the hell up about it. Now, I'm allowed to talk about it, but as a practical matter, we all recognize that just because the guy next door is a Presbyterian and I'm a Lutheran, I don't really make fun of him in public and I don't punch him in the face, even though obviously he's misguided.
Yeah, 100%.
And you know, I got Methodist cousins, and you know, we get along.
Who says there's no white on white racism, man? What the hell's going on here?
Yeah, you know, and sometimes that gets a little touchy, but you know, we all behave, and that's a very American concept. What I think most people born and raised in the United States don't appreciate, no way that they would, is that the United States is the least racist, most tolerant society in the world.
Amen.
That's why it's a great place to live, because that attitude is what trips over into what we call freedom. And that is what lays the foundation for what we call capitalism. And that's why we're so much wealthier than everybody else. It's all related. And the moment we have the conversation about how I think you should behave, and we give voice to that in the same context as public policy, I understand. And to your point, you know, good for you. You're not saying it should be public policy. I agree with you. But this is what drives me crazy about so much of what I see going on in the conservative side, by the way, and the liberal side, is that there's a whole lot of mixing up of public policy and the way that we think that cultures ought to work, right?
Where do you think that separation of culture and public policy really comes from? Because I've said for years, Dave has always been a testament to it. You talk history, religion, and politics in public, or like your friends or your family, or like Dave's seen me in grocery store lines, like just talk about like DWI checkpoints, for example. And then it turns into like a political discussion in the middle of a store. And, you know, I'm not, you know, I wish everybody would kind of do that. It's kind of the Socratic method a little bit, but I don't know, like, where do you think? Because it's Dave and I said the show started as politics. It's not like a cultural show, because culture and politics used to be downstream from each other, and now they like are almost the same thing, or people can't differentiate
They're just
them.
the stream at this point.
Yeah, they're
I get that. You know, we've always
scroll,
said that politics is downstream from culture. I think that that is still mostly true, not as true as it used to be, but we need to work very hard at making it true in a real hard fashion. We do not want our politics upstream.
Is there a way to do that? Is it? Do we need better idealizations? Like, do people need to like take one of those tests, like the I side with test, and then know that I'm more conservative leaning? Like, is that a good starting point? Because I remember I took one of those tests after following politics for years, and it literally was what I vote. You know what I mean? I was like, well, of course, this is what I side with. I know like what I believe. You know, like I've sat there, I've been tested, I've talked about it, but you know, I don't think that's a general experience most voters or Americans do.
That's true. Although I think that most Americans are pretty good at picking sides. They may not be very good at it in the sense they don't know why they pick a side. Because their sister did or their dad or something. But people are good at picking sides. It seems to me, I don't know that you guys want to go here, but I'll see if I can do this in 60 seconds. it seems to me that we stepped off the curb as a matter of culture with the downfall of other important issues in our lives, creating a vacuum that our discussions about public policy have filled. That begins, the most obvious was the decline in the role that religiosity has played in our society, and that led to, for a variety of reasons that we don't need to tease out, but we have seen a downfall in the role of the family and certain, let's just go with behaviors, have changed in terms of our society's acceptance of them. When these institutions that used to be the bedrock of our culture, and we may one day again find bedrock institutions that our culture is based on, but right now everything is just very, very fluid. The past 60 years has been extremely fluid. When these institutions deteriorate or decline in terms of the roles that they play, it creates a vacuum. And much of that has been filled with things that were initially tangentially related to politics, and now it's just full on politics has filled that void. One of the reasons, of course, is the development of new communications technologies, which has allowed everyone to get politics the way you like it, to make you feel good, and you don't have to understand why anyone else might disagree with you. So it fosters an intolerance because you just literally don't know why someone thinks differently than you. And then you have politicians who leverage that, telling you that anyone who votes differently is a moron. So
it's a digital plantation.
It's a digital plantation where politicians try to control their field hands and don't let them have any other information. And we tend to think that this is an American phenomenon, but it's mostly a communist one. It's just mostly a totalitarian one. But in our corporate structure, our corporate media has done a good job of figuring this out, and the politicians have learned how to leverage it. So here we are with a population that hate each other's guts because they quite literally can't see eye to eye. They just literally don't understand why anyone would vote differently than they would. And it's as a matter of objectivity, it's really astounding that there are people in the United States, huge proportions of people in the United States, who believe that there are millions of fellow Americans who are idiots because they vote differently, right? Hillary Clinton didn't invent this concept, but she certainly accelerated it. Half of Trump supporters are in a basket of deplorables.
Mm-hmm. Those dark hearts over there, man.
And prior to that, Obama said that
bitter clingers
clinging to their Bibles and their
Bibles
guns.
And guns. Yes, that's correct.
If that's your analysis, if that's your political analysis, you're not good at this, or you're lying and manipulating us. Now, in the case of Hillary, I think both of those are true. I think she was manipulating her fans, and she's not very good at it. She's no Bill Clinton, right?
It's really bad at manipulation.
No, she is not.
Well, she wasn't good at political analysis. But part of the reason she said such dumb things is because she was manipulating her base. In the case of Obama, it's really hard to argue that Barack Obama was not good at political analysis. Few were as good at it as he was. I think he probably knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't really care whether the Republicans hated him more than they did yesterday. He just wanted his base to fall into line. And I think he was okay catching a lot of flack for saying people are clinging to their Bibles. And
as politically savvy as he was, he didn't get nearly as many votes as Biden. Isn't that crazy?
It's insane, but let's not go there.
There's no way that was real, dude.
So I think that, the answer to your question, while it is complex and long-term, the answer to your question is, just as Dave said a moment ago, our culture and our politics have become all intertwined. That's not a good thing. I think it is per se a bad thing. It has to be teased out. Once it's teased out, then we can begin the process of creating more tolerance in our politics. I do believe that all of our complaining about politics being so bad, right? To pick a word, our politics is so bad. Everyone hates each other's guts, and now we have political violence, and we have a complete meltdown, right? There's a lot of complaining about it. I think that in the next political cycle, finally, that is going to be an issue. In other words, up until now, it hasn't really been, the divide hasn't been an issue. You know, if you're a Republican, you can say anything you want about a Democrat. And if you're a Democrat, you can say anything you want about a Republican, and you pay no price for it whatsoever, right? But I do believe in the next cycle, there will be politicians. This is really optimistic. I have no evidence for this, by the way. I'm just going to make an optimistic assertion that there will be politicians, hopefully at least one, to make me not a complete loser. There will be at least one politician that makes hay out of claiming to be able to unify the nation. That will be an issue per se. Whether that politician will be successful, whether there'll be a lot of politicians, I don't know. But
you're saying that just by default, because the country is going to be so divided in the next 4 to 8 years, you mean political cycles here? So in the next 5 years, basically, we're really going to see all these ropes that we're tying to make the nooses of the political discord. Like the issues that divide us will be so large that we're like, do you suspect political violence on like not average Americans, but normalization of like Republicans getting attacked or Democrats getting attacked or Democrats having to move in mass? And
I think that's a major risk, And I think there will be politicians that claim to stand against that and are able to gain some traction, because it's getting worse, not better. And Americans are starting to resent it. In other words,
it's not like they're shooting after presidential candidates, you know what I mean?
For example, right. Things are bad. And now you've got people shooting at Republicans and people shooting at Democrats. And so I think that a certain proportion of the population, I don't know whether this is 5% or 50%, but some proportion of the population is going to get pissed and say, we want a politician who at least claims to be able to do something about this.
Well, I hope so. And I know our hour is up for sure, but to that point, and I really hope so, because to that point, we just recently saw a political assassination, and the conversation wasn't how terrible it is that one of our representatives was murdered in cold blood. The argument was whether or not the guy's a Democrat or a Republican.
It's disgusting.
Ryan normally does our
absolutely disgusting.
Well, here's what I'm going to do.
I don't know if we can, I'm not sure of how to address that in a relatively short-term fashion, but we do need to stop our politics from being a stand-in for our religiosity. We can't be adopting this idea that you vote differently than I do, therefore you think differently than I do, therefore you are differently than I am, therefore you're a loser, and therefore I punch you in the face. That can't be the way this works anymore.
Yeah, well, you kind of touched on it, but who was it? Nietzsche said that after the death of God, everything will fall apart. That's the religiosity. We are naturally worshiping creatures. If you don't worship something higher than society and God, in a God, you will worship money and mundanity. You will worship celebrity and false idols. You will fall from grace, the whole nine. I've been there. Dave's been there. And Dr. Mike Tremont on Dave Ryan, December 1773. Catch us on Rumble for the greatest podcast in human history. As always, I appreciate everybody for your time. Oh, and we will have you on very soon, because I will be damned if you had 3 pillars here. I know we're at the end, but David, stop it. Your military threat, financial collapse, and civilian unrest. We did touch on them. But before your whole thing on your next political cycle with this, I'm not going to just wait 5 years to have my neighbors come try to kill me. So yeah, I guess until then, Dave Ryan, Dr. Mike Maat, thank you for your time. December 1773, catch us on Rumble for the Greatest Podcast, Human History. As always, I appreciate you both for your time. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Dude, thanks for your time. I'll see you later, Dave.
You guys
Thank
take
you.
care.
You too.